It has been nearly a year since my last Fredrik Backman focused video on my channel, and now we're getting two right in a row. So yes, today I am going to be talking about The Winners by Fredrik Backman, which is the third book in the Beartown series, and trilogy actually. He did announce that this would be the last book that's a part of the Beartown series. So in this video, we're going to be reviewing that, and then next week I'm going to be talking about the Fredrik Backman adaptations. So that's movies and TV shows. There's 4 of them that have been made based off of books that Backman has written. So yeah, fun little Backman party. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So really we have 3 parts to our agenda today. The first one is actually not to talk about The Winners, but to instead talk about everything my son needs to know about the world. I feel like I got that title wrong. But yes, I have officially read the nonfiction book. Technically, I've been clickbaiting for the last 2 videos saying, oh, I've read all of Fredrik Backman's books, and then just being like, except that one, and just hoping no one would care. And you know what? No one did care. And I'm starting to realize maybe it was for a reason. Ooh. So we're going to start by talking about that book, and then we're going to talk about The Winners, and then I'm going to update my official Backman ranking, which I'm very excited to do because I've had a little bit of a refresher from rereading the Beartown books in general, and also from watching like the movies and adaptations and things in order to get ready for next week's video, because just like being in the stories again helped me kind of remember, even if they weren't, you know, exactly like the book. So let's begin with talking very briefly about everything my son needs to know about the world, should know about the world, everything I want my son to know about the world. I don't know. But if you just want to skip right to the review of The Winners, I totally understand. There will be timestamps. So, the nonfiction book. I believe this came out the same year that A Man Called Ove came out. So if I remember correctly from doing research from the first video, Backman wrote A Man Called Ove based off of a series that he kind of started online at first, and then converted into a novel, but people weren't picking it up, so then he wrote the nonfiction book, and then they both happened to get published like the same year, and one of them really took off. I'm sure you know which one. But I wanted to give the nonfiction book a chance, even though I think I've only ever heard one person talk about it, and it was all right. It's very much focused on giving advice, I guess, kind of to other parents, I would say. I mean, I'm sure that it will be very beneficial for his son to read it when he's old enough. I'd assume that he's like in his teens now, because I think that book came out like 10 years ago. But as far as like an audience, like a broader audience for this book, I would say that it's probably largely focused towards parents, which I am not. So that's probably partially why I didn't connect with it a lot. But also I felt like it was really filled with cliches, and maybe they weren't as cliches back when it was written. That's totally possible. But I think that did detract a little bit. And I feel like a lot of it kind of boiled down to like parents make mistakes and like we don't know what we're doing, but we love you anyways kind of thing. And it's all very like sweet, but it's just not something that like I particularly wanted to read. And it's not a very long book, so it's not like it's 500 pages of that kind of material. But it's still, I was pretty bored by it, and it did kind of take me a while for how short it was. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that. I will say it was still sweet. It was still heartwarming. It's still Fredrik Backman, you know, like it's still going to have that feeling to it. There were a couple of things that I think he probably would have said differently today based off of like the writing I've seen him come out with now versus then. Specifically, some gender things that he talks about in the book, and like girls versus boys growing up. I just don't think that he would probably say it at least in the same way as he did in that book. It's nothing like terribly bad or anything. It's just like, I wouldn't have said that, basically. So let's get into The Winners. Again, this is book 3 and the final book of the Beartown series. So we've got Beartown, Us Against You, and then The Winners. Now this book is set to come out September 27th in the US and October 4th, I think, in the UK. I did mention in my last Backman video that I wanted to reread Beartown and Us Against You as a way to better rank all of the books, but also in preparation for this third book. I do not think that you should do that. If you're thinking about rereading the first 2 in order to prepare yourself for the third one, I would say don't. It's not even like you don't need to. I would actively advise you to not. Because I did that, and there's so much recapping that happens at the beginning and really throughout the book. Anytime that there's relevant information from the first 2 books, it is said in the 3rd book, even if it's already been mentioned. There's several chances it gives you to be like, hey, remember when this thing happened? Honestly, you could probably read this book without reading the other 2. Like, that's how much it gives you from the first 2. And it's to the extent that it was boring to me at the beginning of the book because it was so much of that and I had just read it. So yeah, that's that I wanted to get out of the way right away. If you're thinking about doing it, I would say no, just read the 3rd book. Now, as far as the book in general and how I felt about it, I think that it was pretty good overall. The beginning of the book, and I would say even like the first half of the book, I really struggled with, and I just wasn't feeling it. I didn't want to pick it up. I think a large part of that was because of how much recapping it did, but also just the focus of it was really different, I felt, than the first 2 books. I would say the first book, it's about hockey in a small town, but then it surprises you by actually being about something much bigger than that, and by getting much more into like the politics behind it and how much there are like sides to things that there really shouldn't be sides to. So like the hockey is kind of just an analogy for the town itself. And then the second book, Us Against You, it was good. It was nice to expand a little bit more on those characters that we saw, and I think it did a good job of like reaching a nice conclusion by the end. It got a little bit more into that political space, I would say. But yeah, overall, I think, especially now that I've reread both of them, I would say that Us Against You is not, it doesn't really stand up to the level that Beartown got to, and it didn't really feel super necessary, which is okay if it's leading to a 3rd book that feels better. A lot of times that happens when there's a series with 3 books in it, when there's a trilogy, where the first book's really strong, the second book feels more like it's bridging a gap or setting up for something that's going to happen in the 3rd, and then the 3rd book is really strong. But that's not really the feeling or the trajectory that I got. In fact, I feel like with the Beartown series, and I'm very sad to say it, but I feel like it's kind of just a downhill from first book to last book. That's not to say that the bottom of the hill is like ground level, it's still good. It's just that it never really reached how good the original book was. And I think that it could have just been the original book now that I've read all 3. That's my personal opinion. Because by the time we get to the 3rd book, it is so much about the politics of this town, and not even just this town, it's this town and Head. And the characters that we've come to know, we don't get as much from. And he introduces new characters that it's a little bit hard to care about right away, especially when you're just wanting to find out how your characters from earlier are doing, because there is a 2-year time jump. So you just want to know like what happened to the characters that you've come to love and know so well. And all of a sudden you're like in this story about like another family that you don't know. And I mean, of course, it's Fredrik Backman, so he does get you to really like this family and everything, of course. Like these new characters, they do play a meaningful role in this story, but I think that it was just so much setup because there had to be so much setup because he had to refer back to what happened in the other books, remind you of that, but also he wanted to introduce all of these new characters at the same time. And there was just so much going on and it felt so spread out at the beginning that it was just kind of annoying and hard to read. Like it felt like I was really putting the work in for the book. It also becomes so very little about the hockey, which I know that was never the point. Beartown was never really about the hockey. It's a huge part of the book, but that's not the message. It's just used to tell the message. But it was still a fun part of the book and something that was a good way to kind of structure it around, to know that you're looking forward to like a specific game. And then that doesn't really exist in the 3rd book. There are hockey games, but they kind of just spring up on you. It's not like when they're going to happen, where like in a week or in, a month you are. It's just kind of free flowing without a real end goal in sight, if that makes sense. But at the same time, Backman does do that thing that he very commonly does, which is to do a lot of like alluding to something terrible that's going to happen, or a lot of foreshadowing to that. I mean, we see that in a lot of his works, but specifically in the Beartown series. In this one, it was done for such a long period of time that it felt kind of ridiculous. Like I was like, okay, like just have it happen now. I'm tired of just hearing that a terrible thing is going to happen. Like, just have it happen. And it's tough because I struggle with, I like the idea. I like that he does this. Like, he never really lets you forget that something's going to happen. He never really lets you have like a happy moment, because it'll always be ended by like, and this is the last time that that'll happen. And I think in Beartown that was done really well, but just in this book, it was so drawn out. It was mentioned so many times, specifically in the first half of the book, that it just got almost like gimmicky by the time it actually got there, and it took away, I think, from what actually happened. Now, I will say that the second half of the book was much better, in my opinion. I think it got back to what was good about Beartown, and there was a lot more about the characters that we know from the original book. There are some character trajectories that I wasn't necessarily happy with, but I understand that those things happen. And then by the end of the book, he totally had me. I was bawling like a baby, as I always am when I finish one of his books. So yeah, overall, still a good book, but I think that really the second and third book weren't super necessary. And I think that Beartown could have just stood on its own. I don't really think that the other portions of it were necessary to be told. So a bit of a disappointment. Still fun to see where the characters go, where they end up and everything. Like, it's nice to just revisit those characters that we have come to love so much. All right, so now we've come to the ranking portion of this video. Ooh, okay. I think I'm gonna have some changes to make here, actually. So with my last video that I did, my rankings were Beartown and Us Against You being both sharing the top position, which was mostly because I couldn't remember how I felt about one versus the other. Like, they were both kind of the same thing in my mind. So that was a big goal of why I wanted to reread those. So those two are at the top, and then it's Anxious People, and then A Man Called Ove, Britt Marie Was Here, and Every Morning the Walk Home Gets Longer and Longer, and then The Deal of a Lifetime, and lastly, My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. So I think now I'm gonna put the nonfiction at the bottom. This is, again, purely like personal rankings, like how I feel about the books, not how I think anybody else is gonna feel about the books. So for me, I'm not a parent, and I also just didn't really get on with this book in general, so I'm gonna put the nonfiction book at the bottom. Is it Everything I Want to Tell My Son? Something like that. I'm sure at least once in this video I got the correct title. And then above that is going to be My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You That She's Sorry. And then I'm gonna stick with The Deal of a Lifetime above that. And then, ooh. So I will say that above The Deal of a Lifetime already gets into the books that I really like by Fredrik Backman. So I don't think that really any book that gets this position is like that worse off, but I think that I'm gonna put the winners here and then do And Every Morning the Walk Home Gets Longer and Longer. And then I'm gonna put Us Against You. Just because I think that all of the other books from this point, and even the novella Every Morning, all of those are so like wonderfully self-contained that like it feels like a full story. It's able to do this like full circle moment that I don't think the other books in the Beartown series besides Beartown was really able to accomplish. But I do think Us Against You is closer to accomplishing it, so it is gonna go above Every Morning. And then I'm switching another thing. Then I'm gonna do A Man Called Ove. Oh, and then I can't decide on second place. Okay, I think I'm gonna do Britt Marie Was Here in third, and then do Anxious People in second and Beartown in first. I am really close between Britt Marie Was Here and Anxious People. Britt Marie has stuck with me so much more than I expected it to. That book has my heart. But if I think about like a fully formed story, I don't know, I think Anxious People just does something very unique and very cool. And I love a story that can tell all of these different perspectives and bring them together at the end. I think that that's great. And I think that both Anxious People and Beartown do that. Whereas Britt Marie Was Here, it focuses more on Britt Marie, but like I do love it. But yeah, these are my official rankings of the Backman books as it stands 2022. Here's hoping he's writing another book for 2023 or 2024. Does he do every year or every 2 years? Maybe it's been almost 2 years since I did a video on Backman. Maybe I completely lied in the opening to this video. Wow, okay, so it might be like another 2 years before we get another Backman, but I'll be here to update this ranking and to talk about whatever that book might be. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. I hope that you did enjoy it, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I upload new videos every Wednesday, so I hope to see you then. Bye.